Our final thing that we need to do, we want to add in these text boxes so that when I type things in, I can change this to whatever text that I want to change it to. So I have full control over how this works. So what we're going to do is actually similar to what we did with the slider where we could change the speed, but instead what we want to do is change the original image that we're actually sampling instead. So it's a little bit more tricky, so that's why we're doing it last, but let's go over this piece by piece. Now the first thing we want to do is, again, similar to what we did with the slider, we want to add this into our HTML. So I'm going to add this underneath, still within my div class actions. I'm going to add in an input. I'm going to add a class of line 1, and I'm going to add a value inside here, which is just good. It's obviously good morning. And what we should see up here is good. It is good. And what we're also going to do is underneath here, add another input with the class of line 2, and the value of this one is going to be, unsurprisingly, morning. So watch out for this kind of angle bracket on the ends. It just needs to be in here as well. So what we should see now is something that looks pretty much like that. We can change good and morning. Now at the moment, of course, if I just change to evening, this stuff doesn't change because I've not hooked this up together. So we need to start hooking this up together to make it a little bit more usable. How do we do that? Well, let's think about this. So at the moment, we're basically cloning this on setup. But if I change any of this stuff, this won't update the thing in setup. Setup just runs once. So for instance, if I just put this in the same way as what I had up above, it won't actually work. So let's just try this out. First thing I'm going to do is similar to what we have with wave input. I'm going to do a constant called line 1 input. And this is going to be the document.query selector. And this is input for line 1, .line 1. And of course, I'm just going to copy this and paste this for line number 2, 2 and 2. Now, how do I put this value into here? Well, what I want to do is, instead of good morning here, I can actually pull it in from these text boxes. So to do that, I'm actually just going to add a little bit of code here. So I'm going to add a constant for the text. The text at the moment is going to be good /n morning. And this I just want to put directly into the text box. So I'm going to get rid of this good morning to replace it with this one. I'm just kind of copying and pasting this in. Now, instead of it saying good, I'm going to get rid of the word good. I want it to be the line 1 input. So here is going to be outside here, the line 1 input dot value. And I'm going to add this to /n morning. So now what I'll see is obviously good morning, but if I update any of this, it doesn't change. And the reason for that is because this doesn't update. However, if I go back to my HTML and just change it in here to something like bad morning on load, this will reflect that. And the reason for that is because it only does it once. It only does it on setup. So this is currently working. If I do bad evening, it won't work just yet. So if I just change this to bad evening, not a good morning, it still says bad morning. So I need to change the last bit of my text as well. So my script.js, I don't want it to say morning in here. I'm going to get rid of that and add to the end of this the line 2 input dot value. So I'm adding something that changes to something that stays the same, which is a new line, to something that changes. So at the moment they don't change apart from on setup. So bad evening, good morning has changed. But what I want to do is basically update this graphic whenever line 1 input or line 2 input updates. And they don't do that at the moment. So just quickly, I'm going to go back and just change it to good morning again, just so we have it what it should be. Good and morning. There we go. View. Okay, so what we want to do is listen out for any changes to good and morning and update this text accordingly. So if I go down the page, I've got my function preload, I've got a function called setup, and a function called draw. Now these are given to us by P5, but what we can do is actually make our own. So right at the bottom of my code, I'm just going to tidy this up. I'm going to make my own version of this. I'm going to make a new function that I've called something completely different. And this is going to be called something like create stamp, create copy, create a clone. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to call this function, I'm going to call it create copy, because we're going to create a copy of the original text. And then we're going to do this and write some code. So round brackets, then curly brackets. So what I want to do is basically make this setup every single time. I want to create a copy to set to a graphic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to setup. And in setup, I've got this code from graphic to graphic.text. I'm going to move this into my create copy function. This is something that I want to run, not just on setup, but setup and whenever line 1 changes and whenever line 2 changes as well. So I'm going to cut this out and I'm going to scroll down the page and I'm going to put this in create copy. Now, if I do this as it is right now, what do I see? Nothing. And the reason why I see nothing is this code has never run. How do I make this run? So what I want to do is I want to run this on 3 things: on setup, on line 1 changing, and on line 2 changing. And at the moment, this is a 0 out of 3. So I need to add 1 by 1. So the first one I want to do is on setup. I want to run create copy, the thing I've just made. So here I've got create canvas. Now what I want to replace this with is create copy, and then round brackets means do it. So we run this function. It runs this bit of code that I've just made. So basically think of it like a shortcut, almost like we have these constants. What I can do now is see the same as before. This is just basically kind of cleaning up our code a little bit. But again, if I just change this to bad, this doesn't do anything. But I've got 1 out of 3. I've got my setup, but I haven't got anything on changing of these things. So how do we go about listening out for any changes? So again, I need to add some more code to listen out for any changes. So these line 1 input, line 2 input, I want to listen out for these being changed. So I'm going to go to the bottom of my code and I'm going to write line 1 input. And then what I want to do is a dot on this because I want to do something on this. And I want to listen out for anything that's changed. I want to add an event listener. So add with the capital E for event and a capital L for listener. Then I want to run something on this line 1. What do I want to do? Well, you can see it's complaining already. I want to listen out in quotes for any input, anything that's changed whenever I type in here. But then what do I want to do when anything has changed? Well, I want to run this graphic again and basically update it. So here what I'm going to do is comma, and then I want to run some code. I want to run a function, round brackets, curly brackets. So this should stop it complaining. And whenever I'd like to do function and run some code, again, I just like to open up these curly brackets to make it a little bit easier to read. And in here, what I'm going to put is create copy and then round brackets. So hopefully now, whenever we change anything to do with the line 1 input, it's going to run this code in here, and it's going to run create copy, which in turn runs all of this and basically makes it updated. So now what we should see is if I type in good, any kind of input, go, bad, morning. Now obviously if I do this on input number 2, that one doesn't change because it's not listening out for any changes. So what I want to do is the same thing for this second box. So I want to listen out for any updates. So here what I want to do is pretty much what I have the same as here. So underneath, I'm going to listen out for line 2 input. And again, I'm going to do a dot on this and then add event listener. And then round brackets to run this, to say, please do this now, listen out for any events. What events do I want to listen out for? In quotes, I'm going to listen out for an input. And then, comma, what do I want to do when something happens? Well, I want to run some code. I want to run a function, round brackets, curly brackets. Function just means run some code. And this is on input. And these curly brackets, again, I'm just going to open them up. What do I want to do whenever something changes? Well, I want to run create copy. Create copy. So here what I've done is I've gone from just one place that's always frozen in time to being able to change it in 3 different ways. So here there's 3 places where create copy runs. It's on line 2 input, line 1 input, and when we set this up at the start as well. So what I should see now is I have good morning, and also I could have a bad evening as well.